All right, let's get started here on the Panther-Lair podcast here on a Tuesday night. August 4th is where we're at, and appreciate you listening to the podcast as it happens. Hopefully you are having a good week. Had a good week last week. I apologize for missing last week and not giving any advance notice. I intended on having a podcast last week, but some things kind of didn't work out. Sorry, getting distracted here. YouTube has all kinds of new things they're showing me during the live stream. I don't want to look at it, so I'm going to go back to my live stream software. We'll click over in a few minutes and check out the comments. But yeah, I apologize. Wasn't able to do any podcasts last week. Just had one of those weeks where it didn't work out, and hopefully didn't miss too much. Although there ended up being some stuff late in the week to talk about. We'll certainly discuss that, and we got plenty to talk about on this week's podcast. New ACC schedule and just kind of Pitt's spot in the ACC. I had a chance to over the weekend, I had a chance to check out some top local prospects, see them work out at a camp, guys that are in the senior class, the 2021 class, like Pitt commit Nakai Johnson and some of Pitt's other targets in that class, and then also some of the younger classes in the WPIAL and the City League. And there's some really good players coming up here. Maybe not so much in the 2022 class, which is the group that's going to be juniors in the fall. But in that 2023 class, the guys who are going to their sophomore year, there's some good players to keep an eye on there, and definitely worth checking out. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, talk about Pitt's recruiting in the WPIAL, talk about some historic WPIAL classes, which I wrote about a little bit last week in the 321 column on Panther-Lair.com. So we got plenty to discuss. Defensive line, keep talking about that because, let's be honest, it's kind of fun to talk about Pitt's defensive line for 2020. Whatever becomes of the season, I think it's entertaining to talk about that defensive line because those guys figure to be pretty good, and they look like a pretty talented group, and so it's always fun to talk about that. So we'll have a little conversation there. So plenty to talk about here, and like I say, I hope you're having a good week. Hope you had a good weekend and everything. And I guess the news that came late last week, and I would say, well, I apologize, I didn't have a podcast, but we wouldn't have talked about it on the podcast anyway. We talked about it on the Panthers Insider Show on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan on Saturday morning. We discussed it a little bit, but the news that came out late in the week, what day was it? Was it Wednesday? It might have been Wednesday, even. I think it was Wednesday. Came out that the new ACC schedule, and not the schedule of dates, but the opponents that Pitt's going to face, that all the teams in the ACC will face. And you got sort of official confirmation that Notre Dame is a member of the conference for 1 year, and the Irish will be eligible to play in the ACC Championship game. And I think that's fine. Notre Dame's going to share the money, so all right. At first, my initial reaction when the idea was even floated was, no, Notre Dame doesn't get a spot in the ACC Championship game. If you want to play in the ACC Championship game and, presumably not guarantee yourself a spot in the college football playoffs if you win it, but if you go out and win 10 games, 11 games, if you win 10 games on a 10-game conference schedule, if you go 10-0 or 9-1, on a Power 5 conference schedule, and then you win that Power 5 conference championship game, you're probably going to make it to the college football playoffs. You would think this would give Notre Dame a clearer path. And so I wasn't real keen on it. I said, I don't think Notre Dame should really have an opportunity to get to the ACC championship game. But then when it came out that Notre Dame is going to share some of the revenue from its NBC deal with the ACC, I said, all right, well, I can get on board with that. I think that's a little more reasonable. They're paying their way to be a member of the conference for this season. And a brief aside on Notre Dame. People talk a lot about Notre Dame joining a conference, not joining a conference, and they say that they don't want to join a conference. This is what people say about Notre Dame, that Notre Dame doesn't want to join a conference because they don't want to give up that exclusive deal that they have with NBC. Nobody else has this deal like Notre Dame has. No other individual school has its own individual deal. Everything else is through a conference. They share the money, and people presume that Notre Dame doesn't want to give up that money. And I think that's true to some extent. I think you also have to really understand that Notre Dame honestly, sincerely, genuinely thinks that highly of itself. They really, really like being, as Tony Kornheiser would always say, the University of College Football in America. They really like being different from everyone else. They really like being an independent. And I think it will take them getting dragged, kicking and screaming before they finally enter a conference. And I think it's about that. It's about that, I mean, for lack of a better word, sort of pretentiousness, which if you've made a trip to Notre Dame Stadium, if you've gone to a game there, you kind of see. I remember the first time and every time I've gone to games there, I went in 2008, 2012, 2017. I think that's it. Just 3 trips. In 2010. 8, 10, 12, and then 17. And every time I've been there, I've walked in and said, yeah, I get it. I understand why Notre Dame fans are pretentious. I can remember sitting at one of the games, I think it was 2012, and I was sitting next to Sam Werner, who covered Pitt for the Post-Gazette at the time, and he was a Notre Dame grad. And I remember I tweeted something like that. I was like, boy, sitting here, you kind of understand why Notre Dame fans are pretentious. And Sam was sitting right next to me. He turned to me, he's got Twitter open during the game, and he turns to me and says, Chris, am I pretentious? And I'm like, Sam, you've got your Notre Dame class ring on right now. And I don't think it biased his reporting or anything like that, but I mean, Notre Dame people really like being Notre Dame people. And I think it's important to Notre Dame to keep that independence, partially for the TV money they get from NBC, but they can get a lot of money being part of a Power 5 conference. And being, them joining a Power 5 conference is only going to boost that money up because they're a valuable property. They like the money, but they also like being Notre Dame as its own sort of unique thing that everybody else is in conferences, and then there's Notre Dame. And I think they like it. Now, I will say, and this is the last thing on the Notre Dame topic, there's a lot of things that I feel like a lot of sort of unconventional experiments brought on by the pandemic that we would not have had or would not have even attempted if not for the pandemic. I've said this a lot about work from home and working remotely, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. I think I've even mentioned it here on the podcast. I know I've talked to different people about it just out in the world and said, a lot of companies would never try a 6-month experiment of sending a bunch of their employees out to work from home. You know what I mean? They would have resisted it and insisted on everybody coming to work. They would have had to have been forced to try it. And they might find out that actually it works pretty well. And they could actually lower their overhead and not pay so much rent to have the offices and whatnot that they don't need everyone to be there. But they would never have actually tried it on their own. They needed to have their hand forced. And maybe, just maybe, this whole situation forcing Notre Dame's hand, and they get a little taste of what it's like to be in the conference and the perks that come with being in a conference and the benefits and the bonuses that come with being in a conference. Maybe this is what nudges them a little bit closer to one day actually joining a conference. And if they join one, I mean, it would be the ACC. That's sort of understood, maybe even contractually. I forget exactly what the terms were, but I think it's sort of understood that if Notre Dame were to join a conference for football, they would join the ACC, partially because they're there for any other sport that they're in a Power 5 conference for. So maybe this is what nudges them. Of course, Pitt already had Notre Dame on the schedule as a non-conference opponent for 2020, a home game scheduled for October. When the ACC redid the schedules and came out with 10 conference opponents for each team, Notre Dame counting as one of those, they kept Notre Dame on the schedule for Pitt. We don't know when. We don't know if the game will be the same weekend or not. It may ultimately not matter because I don't know if fans are really going to be able to attend these games anyway. And that's certainly a downside of having Notre Dame at home in the year of the pandemic, because you're not going to have the 68,500 or whatever capacity crowd is when you can, at best you're going to have 25% capacity and maybe have no fans at all. But Pitt kept Notre Dame on the schedule, also kept the games with Syracuse and Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Miami, Florida State. But we also know there were some changes in there, and certainly the changes drew some attention. Gone from the schedule is a road trip to North Carolina, and where was Virginia? Road trip to Virginia, and then a home game against Duke. Those are gone, and what Pitt added was a home game against Louisville, a home game against NC State, a road trip to Boston College, and a road trip to Clemson. Thanks for that, ACC. Good looking out. And I'll be the first to say, right off the top of my head, right off the top, I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. And whatever inkling toward, I mean, I used to watch X-Files back in the day. I saw the Oliver Stone JFK movie. I mean, I used to dabble in that stuff because it was funny back in like 1996, 1999. It was entertaining. It's become a whole lot less entertaining in the last, 6 months, 4 years. Draw whatever timeline you want to draw. I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy, but when North Carolina, Duke, and NC State, who just happen to be known as the Triangle teams, right, at the heart of the ACC, all get to miss Clemson this year. Boy, it's funny how that worked out. And there's part of me that thinks that, reorganizing a schedule, creating a 10-game schedule for 15 teams in a rather short amount of time like the ACC was tasked with doing will make it difficult to intentionally and successfully screw over a couple of teams and really benefit a couple of other teams. But if you sit down and say, these guys are not getting the potential national champion on their schedule, and you start with that as a baseline, and I'm not saying that's what the ACC did, but I don't know. It's funny how it worked out. I mean, congratulations to, Mazel Tov to the Tar Heels and the Blue Devils and the Wolfpack. Lucky for them, they don't have to play Clemson. I think you've seen different ACC scheduling, schedule rankings and who's got the hard schedules, who's got the easy schedules. And boy, Duke, Carolina, and NC State show up with the easy schedules quite often, don't they? I mean, it seems like in outsider analysis and evaluation of the schedules, a lot of people have said that, boy, those three really drew a light slate. They drew a light, a light schedule. Pitt, on the other hand, I mean, it's hard to claim that the schedule didn't get harder. Now, they lost North Carolina, which is a good thing. I think UNC is going to be really good this year. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, probably one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league. But they replaced one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league with the other guy who definitely is one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league. And they get to go on the road for that game. Now, they would have played on the road at North Carolina, but if your trade-off equivalent is dropping North Carolina and adding Clemson, you lost in that deal, right? Not because Carolina is easy, but just because Clemson's really hard. Now, you also lost Duke and Virginia, 2 teams that probably should have been penciled in as wins for Pitt this year. I think Duke certainly, and Virginia, I expect to take a step back after they won the Coastal Division last year. I don't think they're going to be as good this year as they were last year, and I think they were just okay last year. You take those 2 off the schedule. Now you add NC State. They won like 4 games last year. You add Boston College, who has a brand new head coach in Jeff Hafley, and I think Jeff's going to do a good job. I think Jeff has the potential to be a very good coach. I mean, I know him from back when he was at Pitt. I've followed his career. I think he's done well everywhere he's gone. He's made a good impression everywhere he's gone, but he's at a tough job right now. Maybe not the toughest job in the ACC. What would be the toughest job in the ACC? Duke, probably. Duke football, which is why, I mean, David Cutcliffe can pretty much write his own contract at this point, I would think. But, I mean, Boston College is not far behind in terms of difficulty because I just don't know if they care all that much about football in Boston College. So that's going to be a challenge. And I think it's a rebuilding year, as it always is going to be for a brand new head coach taking over a team that won like 6 games last year. But then they also added Louisville in addition to the Clemson game. They get Louisville at home, and I think Louisville is a team that's going to be tough. I think Louisville is better than Duke or Virginia. And then, obviously, the Clemson game. They also flipped Georgia Tech from a home game to a road game. So you've got this interesting sort of sidebar that is not as big of a deal as we've made it out, as we've sort of made of it, but it's still kind of notable that Pitt's 5 road games at Florida State, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Clemson, and at Boston College are literally the longest possible road trips, the 5 longest road trips Pitt could possibly make in the conference. None of those mid-range trips to, like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 schools in the ACC that are in the states of Virginia and North Carolina, Pitt didn't get any of those. They got 2 trips to Florida, 1 trip to Georgia, 1 trip to South Carolina, and 1 trip to Massachusetts. Literally the farthest places they could go. Now, it's not as big of a deal because these teams all charter flights. And, they're not dealing with commercial airlines and layovers and delays and all those things that you and I would deal with if we were making these road trips. I don't really think it's all that unsafe for the team to get on a chartered flight together. I mean, they're going to have testing protocols in. They have to get, per ACC rules, they have to get tested 72 hours before every game. So, I mean, that's not as big of a deal. But you do notice it. You do say, wow, really making them go far. They already had to go to Miami and Florida State. And you threw in Boston College, which is as far north as you could possibly go. And then you flipped the Georgia Tech game from home to road. And again, I don't think anybody sat in Greensboro and said, all right, guys, let's get down to business. First order of business. What can we do for Carolina, Duke, and NC State? Okay, good. And then next up, Pitt. How can we screw Pitt? I don't think that's what anyone said. I could be wrong. There could be a cigarette-smoking man in the ACC offices who's sitting back there and, pulling all the strings. Maybe Donald Sutherland's sitting there on a park bench, laying it all out of how everything went down behind the scenes. I don't think that's the case. But, geez, you do look at it and say, well, the schedule did not get easier. It got tougher. It got a bit tougher, considerably tougher. And so you run down, these 10 games, and I think there are a couple questions that you ask yourself. One is you ask yourself, what should Pitt do against this schedule? Who should they beat? Who, for lack of a better way of saying it, should they lose to? And then who should they, who are the toss-up games? But then you also ask the question of what do they need to do to get to Charlotte? And what does anyone need to do to get to Charlotte? And this is a question I've been interested in kind of all week. For the last week or so, since the schedule or these opponents got announced for all the teams in the ACC. If you assume that Clemson's going to be in the ACC Championship game, that's, I think, fair to assume, at either 10-0 or 9-1. What do you think is going to be the record of the team that faces Clemson? Remember, they're not doing divisions this year. 15 teams, top 2 winning percentage in conference games, go to Charlotte for the ACC Championship game. So someone's going to face Clemson, right? We assume Clemson's going to be there at 10-0 or 9-1. What record is it going to take to get there? 10-0 obviously gets you there. I'm pretty sure 9-1 has about a 95 or 99% chance of getting you there. I put up a poll on Twitter of, what do you think the win total will be for the team that faces Clemson? And the majority, I think 60-some% voted for 8 wins, going 8-2 in the conference. And I think that's about right. You might need to win a tiebreaker to get there at 8-2. Maybe one tiebreaker. There might be 2 8-2 teams. That wouldn't be a surprise. I think you can look back over, since the expansion of the ACC in 2013, there's plenty of years where you've got multiple teams at 6-2. It's split up by divisions, so they don't end up having to go to a tiebreaker, but you see teams with similar records. I think you could see that with 8-2. I think it's possible you could have 2, maybe even 3 teams at 8-2. And that's not, breaking down, saying, well, I think this team's going to do this and this team's going to do this and look at the schedule. I'm just saying you got 15 teams playing 10 games each. I think there's a reasonable chance that at least 2, if not 3, go 8-2. But if you do that, then you should be able to get out of that, head-to-head tie or mini-conference tie of 3 teams with one tiebreaker, I would think. If you only go 7-3, you're going to need a lot of help to get there. If you lose 3 games in this conference schedule, you're going to probably need to win 4 tiebreakers, something like that, 3 or 4 tiebreakers before you finally get, it's going to be like common opponents, record against common opponents probably is how you're going to have to get there. So if you're Pitt, I think the target has to be 8 wins. So do we see 8 wins on this schedule? Do you see 8-2 happening on this schedule? I think you only circle Clemson as the only one that you would say is likely loss, right? There are plenty of potential losses, but I think in terms of likely loss, I would only circle Clemson. All right, so let's start there. Let's say that's one loss. So let's look at the other 9 games. You got Syracuse at home. You got NC State at home. I'm going to say you should win both of those. Okay? You get Georgia Tech on the road. That game last year was a lot closer than it needed to be. I'm going to assume that it's not as close this year, even though it's on the road. And so I'm going to say that's a win. And Boston College, I know Pitt lost to them last year at home. Now you're going on the road up there. They don't have A.J. Dillon anymore. They've got a decent O-line coming back. They got a quarterback transfer in from Notre Dame of all places. Local kid, Phil Dracovic, who is now going, was ruled eligible by the NCAA, so he's going to be playing, but he's going to be a first-year starter. And particularly depending on when you play them in the season, it's going to be who knows what you're going to get out of him. For now, for the purposes of this, I'm going to circle that as a win. I'm going to pencil it in. So we got 4: Syracuse, NC State, Georgia Tech, Clemson, or Boston College, Clemson, Syracuse, NC State, Georgia Tech, Boston College. All right. Can you get 4 more wins out of the rest? You got 5 more games. Can you get 4 wins out of it? Your home games, you have Louisville, Notre Dame, and Virginia Tech. And then on the road, you have Florida State and Miami. Where are the wins? Where are the 4 wins in those 5 to get you to 8-2, which should get you to the ACC Championship game? I'm going to give you Virginia Tech. This one, I'm not, maybe the other wins I circled in pencil and wrote really hard, so it's a very dark line of circle around it. Virginia Tech, I'm going to circle a little more lightly. They beat Pitt 28-0 last year. Now, Pitt's defense didn't give up 28 points to that Virginia Tech offense. They gave up 21. Virginia Tech scored a defensive touchdown. It was a rainy mess. Pitt's offense was terrible. I don't even think Virginia Tech's defense was that great. I think Pitt's offense was just brutally bad. You get that game at home. You know how these games against Virginia Tech tend to go. Pitt has been pretty good against Virginia Tech historically, really over the last 2 decades. I'm going to lightly circle that one as a win. So we got 5 now. Still need 3 more out of Louisville, Notre Dame, Florida State, and Miami. In reality, those 2 games in Florida should probably be wins. Florida State wasn't very good last year. They have a brand new coach. They're going to be somewhat rebuilding. Miami should have been a win last year. Really should have been a win last year. And to a large extent should have been a win in 2018 and was a win in 2017. There is a reality where those 2 games in Florida should be wins for Pitt. I don't think you can circle them even in a light pencil circle, And then you have Louisville and Notre Dame at home. And Louisville, is a toss-up game, I think. Yeah, I don't know what the line is going to be on that. It might be, +3 Pitt or a pick, or +1 or 2 or something, or -1 or 2. It shouldn't be very far apart. Now, if it's late in the season, we've seen those teams for 7 or 8 games at that point. Maybe it will be. But as we sit here right now on August 4th, that should be a bit of a pick'em game. It should be a toss-up game. And then Notre Dame, we've seen Pitt play Notre Dame tough pretty much every time they've faced them since 2005. The 15 game wasn't all that close, but Pitt's offense kind of went in a hole, although Jordan Whitehead had a good game that day. But really, 2005, that first game for Dave Wanstead and Charlie Weiss was a bit of a blowout. But since then, 2008, right? 2008 was the next time Pitt played Notre Dame. They won out there. They beat Notre Dame again in 2009 at Heinz Field. They lost out there in 2010. They lost in 2011. Those were both close games. 2012 was the one where they went to triple overtime and really should have won. That was the one with the 2 number 2s on the field, the terrible pass interference call against K1. Williams, multiple failed 3rd down attempts, a missed field goal. The Pitt had about 8 chances to win that game in 2012. 2013, they beat him at Heinz Field. Big play, Ray Vinipal, right? I don't think they played him in 14. No, they didn't. 2015, they lost at home. It kind of wasn't that close, but it was, it wasn't a total blowout, but I think Notre Dame was pretty much in control throughout the game. And then, in 2018, they went out there. Notre Dame was top 5. Pitt was reeling at that point. They just beat Syracuse, but they weren't in a good spot. As a team, I think they had 3 wins at that point. They might have been 3-3 or something going out to Notre Dame, and they took them right down to the wire. And Notre Dame was top 5 in the country, and that game was in South Bend. So you see the history, and no matter the talent differential that appears to exist, at least on paper, Pitt tends to give Notre Dame a pretty good game. So I don't think you automatically say Notre Dame's going to win that game here at Heinz Field. But somewhere in there, Pitt's going to have to steal a few games. They're going to have to steal one against Notre Dame. They're going to have to go down to Florida and win some of those games on the road. They're going to have to beat Louisville if they want to get to 8-2 and they want to get to the ACC Championship game. I don't know. Those are my initial reactions to the schedule and what it looked like for Pitt. Let's take a look at some of the comments here. Let's see. TRR says Narduzzi gets a pass with Pat Narduzzi gets a pass with this brutal schedule the ACC handed Pitt, right? I don't know if he gets a pass due to the schedule. I think every coach is going to get some kind of pass, just because it's such a weird year, right? I mean, because it's a strange season. It's a condensed, odd schedule that got changed around a month before the season was supposed to start. You have all these different protocols everybody has to go through. If the season actually gets played and they have a full 10 games or 11 games or whatever it ends up being, it seems to me like it'll be a bit of a minor miracle. I don't think there'll be many coaches that get fired this year outside of total embarrassing season, or something like Gary Patterson at TCU saying some dumb stuff. Josh Newark, few comments in here. He says, does 2020 change the future ACC rotation of games? I'd be disappointed to lose Clemson at Heinz Field next year. There's been no announcement about that, Josh. I'd be surprised if the ACC changed they've got a schedule matrix set up for quite a while, right? I mean, they've got it set up through at least 2024, I want to say, if not longer. And so I would think they would go back to what 2021 was supposed to be. There might have been a chance where, there might have been a situation where a team lost its crossover opponent in 2020. That they were supposed to face. I mean, Pitt and Florida State were supposed to be the crossover opponents this year, so that game is staying in place. I'm not sure if anybody lost the crossover opponent, not the permanent one. Obviously, Pitt and Syracuse will face each other every year. Georgia Tech and Clemson, so on and so forth. I think Florida State and Miami, I want to say. Carolina and NC State. You'll have those, and I think they kept those in place, I think. But I'm not sure about the other crossover opponent from the other division. I would guess they would just go back to what they had previously scheduled. And I'm with you. I mean, it'd be fun to see Clemson come up to Heinz Field. Although someone commented, Pitt is, Josh Newark also says, Pitt is undefeated in Death Valley, clearly in Clemson's head. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And like Matt Sable points out, not having fans will make the road games less daunting. And I think there's some truth to that. I think the other element with going on the road, though, it's not just about the fans and the noise and the atmosphere. It's just about being away from home. And that can work for you and against you. I think it can work in your favor that you get away from home and you get all the distractions of home out of your vision. You know what I mean? You're there for one specific reason. Even if you go stay in a hotel in town the night before a home game, all you did was take a bus downtown, right? I mean, you're still very comfortable. Sometimes it's good to be uncomfortable. Sometimes it's good to be out of town. Sometimes it's good to be on a plane and fly somewhere else. I mean, I say this just as someone who goes to these games to work, that if Pitt's in Atlanta or they go to Miami, I mean, people are like, oh, sweet, you get to go to Miami. I mean, yeah, so it's hot when I go outside, but that's kind of it in terms of experiencing the local, variety of life. You're there for a very specific reason, and you're there for a work reason. And I think for the players, I think that can apply, and they're able to sort of focus in a little bit more because of where they are. But at the same time, you're not sleeping in your bed. You're sleeping in what could be an uncomfortable bed. You might not sleep as well. You might not be used to that, weather. There are any number of elements of where being uncomfortable is not a good thing. So I think it kind of works both ways. The fans, taking the fans out of, a place like Miami is not going to make a big deal because nobody goes to those games. Nobody cares about Miami football in Miami. We think Heinz Field has attendance problems. Go to a game at Hard Rock Cafe Stadium or whatever it's called in Miami, and you'll see what bad attendance in a pro stadium looks like for a college team. It's not going to make a big deal there. Clemson is going to be a significantly different atmosphere than what Pitt saw in 2016, but they won in that atmosphere in 2016. So I don't think, when Pitt lost at Penn State in 2017 and last season, I don't think the crowd had that big of an impact. When they lost at Notre Dame in 2018, I don't think it was because of the crowd. I don't think the crowd had a huge impact. They lost because they got outplayed, because they couldn't make key plays at key points in the game. So I think the biggest element is just it's about change and being uncomfortable, which again is not always the worst thing. S. Mac has a question about freshmen. Which offensive freshman do you see having the biggest impact this year? I'm going with Jalen Barden. Yeah, I think Jalen Barden's the wide receiver from Georgia, is going to have a chance to get on the field. I also think Jordan Addison, the wide receiver from Maryland, is going to have a really good chance of getting on the field. He enrolled early, so he's been with the team since January. Didn't get as many practices in the spring as he was hoping to get, and I think as many as the coaches were hoping he would get. But he was able to practice with the team. He's been around. He's been able to study the playbook, learn the offense, and all those kinds of things. I think he's going to have a really good chance to get on the field, play a lot, and potentially contribute to this offense. He's a really good player. Jordan Addison, wide receiver. He's going to be good. Josh Newark mentioned the freshman running back, Izzy Abanikanda. I think he's got a chance to play as well. There are a lot of running backs on this team. None has really distinguished himself or separated himself from the pack. And so I think Izzy Abanikanda is going to have a chance. Vincent Davis got on the field last year, and I think Abanikanda has speed. He's not as fast as Vincent Davis, but he's bigger. And then he's maybe not as big as Todd Sibley or A.J. Davis, although he's comparable. But he's faster than those guys. So he's got a mix of speed and power that could be what this running game really needs to get going. Let's see. Terry Troutmaster, now that Notre Dame is a full member, who else are we going to invite to pair with them? Cincinnati? That's an interesting question, Terry. If Notre Dame were to ever join the ACC for football, I would think that the ACC would want to continue to have divisions, although you wouldn't necessarily have to, right? Like, everybody has gone to divisions, but I don't think you need to have divisions. You could go with the top two teams making it into the championship game. And a lot of people have advocated for that. And it's funny, if you look back over the last, how many seasons has it been? 7, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 7 seasons since the ACC expanded. A lot of times people will say, the ACC needs to do away with the division champions, making it to Charlotte. They need to take the top two teams in winning percentage. That's who needs to make it. And usually when people say that, they're saying it because they feel like the Coastal Division champion stinks, and they don't want the Coastal champ in there. But when you look over those 7 seasons, more often than not, if you did it as the top 2 in winning percentage in conference games, the Coastal champ would still be there. Like the year Pitt won, the year Pitt made it to the ACC Championship game, they went 6-2 in the ACC. And that would have tied them with Syracuse. Syracuse finished second in the Atlantic Division that year. So you had Clemson, of course, and then the top teams after that in terms of record in the ACC were Syracuse and Pitt. Well, Pitt would have won the tiebreaker head-to-head with Syracuse if we were just taking the top 2 teams. So even then, Pitt still would have made it to Charlotte. And I think you see that when you look over the 7 seasons of the expanded ACC, the 14-team ACC, I think you see that a lot of times that Coastal champ still makes it, even if you take the top 2 teams. Not every year, but most of them. Now, who would they, if they did want to add and go to 8-team divisions and a 16-team conference, if they added Notre Dame as team number 15, who would they try and get for 16, or who would they get for 16? I don't know. Terry asked the question, and he suggested Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati would be a good option. I really do. I think ideally you'd be able to pull in somebody like Maryland and get Maryland back into the ACC. I can't imagine they like being in the Big Ten. They probably like the paychecks, but Nobody in the Big Ten cares about Maryland. Nobody in the ACC cares about Pitt or Syracuse, but that's beside the point. Nobody in the Big Ten cares about Maryland. Maryland probably feels much more at home in the ACC, but you got a lot of issues with grant of rights and TV deals, and Maryland is kind of beholden to the Big Ten, so I don't think that could actually work. You would need to get someone from a conference outside the Power 5, probably. You know what I mean? I think you'd have an equally difficult time getting West Virginia, getting Maryland. I don't really know who else you would go after. You're not going to be able to get anybody out of the SEC to get like a South Carolina or something like that. You probably would want to get like a Maryland or a West Virginia if you were going to be able to get somebody from a Power 5 conference. And that's, Maryland certainly meets the academic requirements. They were in the ACC. I don't know if West Virginia does. But if you're going to go outside the Power 5, I like Cincinnati as an option. Fits close enough to the geographic footprint. I don't think you would really want to add a Central Florida or an East Carolina or somewhere like that, or South Florida, or I don't know. I don't feel like there are a lot of great options out there. I would probably be inclined to just go no divisions, honestly. If I had a Notre Dame, I would be inclined to go no divisions. But that's just me. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that too much to see who else would join the conference. Let's see. Dale Gribble says, I was at that Boston College game. Pitt rolled over and wanted no part of A.J. Dillon in the second half. They gave up. Well, part of the problem in that game, Dale, that Boston College game last year, was that Pitt's offense couldn't stay on the field to save its life. It wasn't as much a problem in the first half, but the second half, where you're talking about, Dale, that A.J. Dillon started running wild. I mean, first, you do have to give some credit to A.J. Dillon. He's really good. It was inevitable that Pitt wasn't going to be able to keep him bottled up for the entire game. At some point, he was going to break out. You weren't going to be able to just keep him contained. They did a good job against him for the first half of the game. I think he had maybe, even into the third quarter, I think he maybe had one really good run. They did a good job against him, but that wasn't going to last forever. At some point, he was going to break loose. And the problem was, that's that old saying about sometimes the best defense against a good running game or against a good offense is to keep him on the sidelines. Pitt's offense couldn't stay on the field. They were turning the ball over. They were going 3 and out. I mean, they were killing themselves with penalties. It wasn't. It was a whole team effort. And yeah, I think Pitt's defense got worn down. I don't know if they gave up. I think they got worn down because they just had to stay on the field. Boston College ended up winning the time of possession by like 10 minutes in the game. I think it was a more significant gap in the second half. And that was the problem. They got worn down and couldn't, they got worn down. And that's what it came down to. And TRR says the Pitt D-line has to deal with the Boston College O-line again. Could be a trap game on the road. I mean, possibly. But, again, I don't think Pitt's defense played poorly until they had to keep going out on the field in the second half. And the offense couldn't keep him on the sideline for a little while and give him a chance to rest and keep the ball out of A.J. Dillon's hands. Everybody's got to do their part. And Pitt's offense didn't do its part in that game. Let's roll down here. Terry Troutmaster, again, talking about expanding the ACC, says, if I'm the ACC, I invite Houston before West Virginia. Opens up Texas. I mean, I know that conference geography is a joke. I realize that. When you've got Syracuse and Pitt in the ACC, I understand that, but and not like Houston is any more ridiculous as an ACC team than Cincinnati, but I mean, come on. I don't think Houston. I guess we just give up. We give up entirely. Hey, we had the Pac-10 trying to expand by getting Texas, right? So who gives a what about geography? So yeah, why not invite Houston? Go for it. Let's see. Colton Yanoski says Pitt beats Clemson and Notre Dame but goes 7-3 in conference and misses the ACC championship game by a game. That's the most logical Pitt thing I can think of. Yeah, I mean, that would be brutal. If they go out, they beat Clemson on the road, they beat Notre Dame at home, but they lose to Miami, Louisville, and Virginia Tech. Right? I mean, would that be crazy? Would not be crazy at all. A few comments and questions about the 11th game because, the ACC announced that the ACC announced that conference schools would play 10 conference games and then an 11th non-conference game. The non-conference game being either an in-state road game or a home game. It's what it had to be. And there was some confusion about that. And this is what the ACC said. Like, for your non-conference game, you either have to play at home, or if you're going to go on the road, you have to go in-state. And that, ruled out going to, West Virginia or something like that. The Big 12 then announced that they were going to allow their teams to play a non-conference game, but it had to be a home game. So, Pitt would never be able to go to West Virginia this year, even though it's funny. Technically, they could go play Temple, but they could not go play at West Virginia, even though West Virginia is closer. Although it probably has to do less with proximity and more with, state testing guidelines and quarantines and things like that. So I don't know. Right now, my guess is Pitt's 11th game is going to be Miami of Ohio. That was the scheduled game for this year. It was a scheduled opener for this season. It was a home game, even though it's against an out-of-state opponent. It was a home game, so that fits the ACC's requirements. And Pat Narduzzi said last week about, having having that non-conference opponent. He wouldn't say who he thinks it's going to be, but he said, we want to keep a team that we've been preparing for, and we put in all this work in the offseason trying to scout and get ready for. So, Miami of Ohio makes the most sense to me. Like Josh Newark points out, Marshall's ADs, or really that athletic department, in a statement to, I think, John McGonigal from the Post-Gazette basically said, we haven't heard anything from Pitt. We still expect to play them this year, which the ACC saying that you can't go play road games out of state, which Pitt was scheduled to play at Marshall this season. The ACC said you can't play that game. So it's kind of funny that maybe Pitt has not communicated that to Marshall. I'm not sure. Maybe I don't really understand that situation. Let's see if there's any other questions that we want to get to before we move on to different topics. Let's see. The Butthole Bandit, clever name, is the game plan still to have Kenny Pickett run over to Mark Whipple after every play? And just because I can never miss an opportunity to talk about the most, how would you put it, overanalyzed element of Pitt's season in 2019. I could probably find at least 50, if not 100 different things to talk about with Pitt football in 2019, things that worked and things that didn't, before I would get to Kenny Pickett going to get the play from the sideline. They never had a problem with getting the play in. I don't remember them taking a whole bunch of delay game penalties. I don't remember them being late with the snap or rushing the snap because Pickett was late getting into the huddle. I think they were just fine with that. I don't think it wears him down. He wasn't sprinting. He's like a 20-year-old kid. He can jog to the sideline and back. And yes, oh my God, TV announcers made fun of it. This is what I always heard. The TV announcers just think it's so funny. We're the laughing stock. Well, since when do you care if they make fun of it? I mean, it's what Whipple wanted to do, and Pickett seemed fine with it. Whipple wanted to talk to him. Just a couple quick words. Hey, we're going to do this play. Make sure you watch for that thing. Hey, they did this last time. Keep an eye out for this thing. Just a couple extra words of advice, for whatever it's worth. But they liked it. It wasn't a big deal. It didn't change one thing about their offense and how it worked in 2019. When their offense struggled, it wasn't because Kenny Pickett was going to the sideline. And when their offense made good plays, it wasn't because Kenny Pickett went to the sideline. It's just a way to get the play in. And you cut down on the chance of other teams stealing your signals, which Pat Narduzzi is more than a little paranoid about. So I'm glad you brought it up. I would not have brought it up on my own, but I like it when people bring it up because then I can say, again, it doesn't matter. All right, I want to switch gears real quick and talk about recruiting just for a little bit because on Sunday I went out to West Mifflin High School, the 210th showcase, 210 speed and agility training. Guy named Dwayne Brown trains a lot of local high school players, does a lot of speed and agility training. He still trains Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald's been training with him for years. And Aaron, wherever he comes back into town, he still goes and trains with this guy. He believes in him. And Dwayne Brown trains a lot of local players. And so he put together a little showcase workout camp and got about 100 or so of the best local WPIAL guys all spaced out, wearing masks and things like that, to go through some workouts and drills on Sunday at West Mifflin High School. And it's a great event. Really good talent showed up. And some of the guys that I really wanted to see were there. I was excited to see them. And one is Nakai Johnson, his defensive end from West Mifflin. He's committed to Pitt. And you remember he committed last summer, the summer before his junior year. So real early commitment, real excited about Pitt, a local guy, a hometown guy who wants to be home, wants to stay home and kind of build something at Pitt like he's seen guys like Paris Ford and DeMar Hamlin do. And then later Dayon Hayes, who of course is on campus as a freshman this year. This is my first chance to really see Nakai Johnson in person. And I got to tell you, this guy's impressive. 4-star defensive end, ranked as one of the top, I think, 5 recruits in the state of Pennsylvania for the 2021 class, and looks every bit the part. Looks like we actually might have him underrated. 6'3", he told me he's like 238 right now. He looks thick. I think he can add good weight to that size, but he's really fast, really quick off the edge. And that was what he did. And, you have these non-pad camps. Some people sort of derisively call them underwear camps. And you have guys out there, shorts and shirts, working against each other, and masks, working against each other. And so, wide receiver versus DB, one-on-ones. All right, you can really see something there. You can see the quarterback throw. You can see the receiver make the catch, defensive back try and break the pass up, all those kinds of things. Route running and coverage. You can really tell a lot. It's a little bit trickier with the linemen, right? Because they don't have any pads on. They don't have helmets on. They're not going to be out there banging around. They're not going to just try and use their strength, although strength's an element, even in these one-on-one drills. But what you can really see a lot of is quickness. And Nakai Johnson, he's not just quick, he's fast. He's got fast twitch, he's explosive at the snap of the ball, and he is hard to block. And it was fun to watch. It was fun to sort of think down the road of what he's going to become. I think he's going to be really good at Pitt. I mean, I think we talk about this defensive line and sort of the legacy that they're sort of creating and the continuity and the depth that they build up. With Nakai Johnson in the pipeline for the next few years, to go with Dayon Hayes, who came in 2020. He's a freshman this year. And as they continue to build out this recruiting class with the guys that they recruited in 2019 and 2018, this D-line, for as good as it's going to be this year, I'm not going to say it's going to be better down the road, but they appear to have the talent and the depth built up to kind of keep it up. So you lose Patrick Jones after this year. Rashad Weaver after this year. The defensive end. Just talking about defensive ends. You lose Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver after this year. But in 2021, you've got Desmond Alexander back. Probably Habakkuk Baldonado as the other starter. You got John Morgan as a backup. You have Bam Brema ready to step in as a backup. Because I've heard a lot of things about him. He redshirted last season as a freshman. I think you'll see him on the field as a reserve this year. And then I think you'll see him as a top reserve in 2021. You've got him. I'm going to miss someone, so I hate to go, just player by player. But then you add in Dayon Hayes from the 2020 class. Actually, a couple guys. You got Sam Williams and Emmanuel Belgrave, two really athletic, sort of lean guys that I think you like to get guys like them because they're really good athletes. You need to add weight to them and get them stronger. But you love having that kind of athleticism at defensive end. They can work around the tackles and just be really hard to get their hands on. Now you add in Nakai Johnson in this class, potentially another D-end or two. And those guys will be freshmen in 2021. You go down the road and you say, wow, they're pretty well set up to take what they're doing this year and what they did last year and just keep building on it. And if not every guy is going to pan out, but if 75% of these guys, which it looks like there's a good chance that you could get 3 out of every 4 guys that they've recruited at defensive end in these last few classes, you get 3 out of 4 guys to show up, to really become what they're projected to be. You're going to have, you're going to have a real lineage of defensive ends and defensive line as a whole because the tackles aren't bad either. tackles are pretty strong. And down the line, I mean, you've recruited good depth there as well. And then adding Elliott Donald 2 weeks ago was a huge addition to the defensive tackle position. Still in on Dorian Ford, the defensive tackle from Baldwin, although I think there's a possibility that Ford could end up moving to offensive line and maybe be even better on that side of the ball. You're still building up those positions, particularly if he stays at defensive tackle. And then they're on some other tackles for this class of 2021. We talked so much, and I know I've gone down the road with this defensive line in the past, but we talked so much early in Pat Narduzzi's time at Pitt. We talked about the defensive backs, the corners and the safeties, and how well he was recruiting them, and he had to rebuild the positions and the secondary, and how he'd done such a great job, and he brought in all those guys, and they're going to be really good, and it's really rebuilding the depth long term. And I think that's still the case to some extent, although 2021 is going to be really interesting because you're losing a bunch of guys. You're losing the whole starting secondary, the whole projected starting secondary from 2020. DeMar Hamlin and Paris Ford at safety, Damari Mathis and Jason Pennock at corner. So you're going to have all new guys out there in 2021. Now, ideally, you're able to get those backups some reps in 2020. I mean, they tried to rotate the DBs last year as well, and I think they'll do it this year too. And so we'll see how well the recruiting and the depth building has done, or how good it's been so far, once you get to 2021 and beyond. But really the focus, at least from the outside, like the emphasis or what we point to and say, boy, they've done a great job recruiting this position, it's really shifted up to the front of the defense. It's shifted up to the defensive line. And they are looking pretty loaded, pretty strong, pretty talented, and pretty deep for years to come. And Nakai Johnson is the next step. He's the next step, and he's a guy who I think will be on the field in probably early in his career. Let's see here, a couple questions before we jam out here. TRR says the three sophomore corners, Judson Towner, Marquez Williams, and A.J. Woods, do two have a future at Pitt? Both corner spots will be open in 2021. I think it's first of all, Towner and Williams are going to be redshirt juniors, I think, right? They were redshirt freshmen last year. Okay, so they'll be redshirt sophomores this year. A.J. Woods will be a true sophomore because he took because he played last year and did not redshirt. Those guys are going to get some playing time this year. And they're going to have to find out what they have in those guys. They want to keep Mathis and Pennock on the field as much as they can, but they're going to have to find out what they have in Williams and Tallender and Woods this year. They're going to have to get a real sense of those guys, particularly Williams and Tallender, because those guys, those are third-year players this year. You need to start really seeing who they are. It doesn't mean they can't develop in their fourth year or their fifth year, but third year, they need to start showing more than they've shown, because if they don't, they're going to get passed by A.J. Woods or some of the guys who are coming in as freshmen this year, Rashad Battle and Javante Royal or Hunter Sellers. You need to find out what you have. Because like you said, TRR, the corner spots are going to be open in 2021. So some of those guys are going to have to step up and be ready to step into starting roles. Terry Troutmaster asks, what's my T-shirt say? Inaugural backyard what? Let me see. I can slide back here a little bit. Let me get my camera so you can see it. See, Backyard Brawl Crawl. This was a Pittsburgh clothing company, had a bar crawl, raised money for it. To raise money, I forget what the cause was. This was 2017 when Pitt played West Virginia in basketball. They went on a bar crawl through Shadyside. We were a sponsor. Panther-Lair.com sponsored it, and so I got a shirt out of it. Pretty slick little shirt. I like the colors, like how it looks. So Pittsburgh Clothing Company, it's a great local company. We got some really good local T-shirt companies around here. Pittsburgh Clothing Company, Steel City Cotton is great. And they have just great products, great Pittsburgh themed products, Pittsburgh centric products. Look them up. Pittsburgh Clothing Company, PGH Clothing Co. And then Steel City Brand. I forget what they are on Twitter. I think it's Steel City Brand. Ricky the Dragon Kayak says, give us five true freshmen who won't redshirt this year. All right, I want to make sure I don't miss anyone, so I'm going to bring up the old scholarship board 5 true freshmen who will play. So, I already said Jordan Addison. I'll give you those 3 on offense. Jordan Addison, Jalen Barton, and Israel Bonaconda. I think they'll all get on the field this year. It's tricky when you say they won't redshirt, right? Because guys could play 4 games. Josh Newark asks, is there any word on the redshirt rule changing to 6 games instead of 4? Pat Narduzzi brought that up. I'm going to assume it stays at 4. But I think Bonaconda, the running back, Addison, the receiver, and Barton, the receiver, all play in more than 4 games. But let's say 2 out of those 4. 2 out of those 3. Well, now as I look down the list, let's say those 3. Okay? Let's say those 3 guys play. Bonaconda, Addison, Barton. That would be 3 guys who get on the field. And then I really think some of these corners, Rashad Battle, Javonte Royal, I could see them both on the field. It'll be interesting to watch the freshman linebackers, too. Solomon DeShields, Bengali Kamara, and A.J. Roberts. I think they'll have a chance. Maybe not on defense. Maybe on defense, but maybe not. But on special teams, like Brandon George did or an A.J. Woods did, I think you could see those guys get out there that way. So somewhere in that group. And then, I would say Dayon Hayes. In a normal year, I would say Dayon Hayes, but it's not a normal year. They've got Patrick Jones, Rashad Weaver, Desmond Alexander, Habakkuk Baldonado, and John Morgan. Right there is 5 guys. And then you're going to have some of the redshirt freshmen like Bam Brema or Bryce Nelms or DeAndre Jules, if those guys are still at D end or if they moved. But those guys are going to be chomping at the bit too. It's going to be hard, I think, to find room for Dayon Hayes unless he just forces his way out there and he's too good to keep on the sideline. Final one we'll take here from Bud Old Man. It says, what do you think Wayne's ceiling is? I'm assuming you're talking about Jared Wayne. I think Jared Wayne is going to be I think he's going to be good for Pitt. I think he's going to be one of the primary pass catchers this year. I think you're going to have Taysier Mack. You're going to have Shockey Jacques Louis. Here's what I would guess, all right? I would say when you look at it at the end of the season, your leading receiver this season will be Shockey Jacques Louis. And then you'll have Taysier Mack, potentially with second most catches, but maybe the most yards since he tends to go downfield more. And then I think you'll have Jared Wayne as your 3rd leading receiver, with the wild card being the freshman. And I think Jordan Addison's going to get out there and play a lot. I think Jalen Barton's going to get a lot of opportunities. I don't know if they're going to be one of the top 3 pass catchers on the team or not. Well, now I say about pass catchers, Lucas Krull is going to be in that mix too, I really believe. So maybe he might catch more passes than Wayne, but I think Wayne is going to be number 3 among the wide receivers. And I think he can be pretty good. I think last year he showed a potential to be I think Jared Wayne last year showed the potential to be a very good possession receiver. I want to see if his ceiling is a little higher than that or if he can do a little more than that in 2020. But I think he could be a very good possession receiver though. He's got good size. I think he made some good catches. He made some mistakes too. He caused an interception, basically, at Boston College when he ran his route incorrectly. He had a fumble. Was that the Miami game, maybe? He's made mistakes, but he also was second leading receiver on the team over the final 4 games of the season. Part of that was, and really he was only behind Maurice French, who missed a few games because he had a broken jaw, but then caught like 22 passes in the last 2 games combined or something like that. So, Jared Wayne I think has a high ceiling. I'm not sure what his role ultimately will be though. I want to see him do a little bit more and then just be a possession receiver. All right, last one. Royce Beacom asks, any word on Joey Yellen being able to play this year? I don't. Pat Narduzzi said, he said last week that they hadn't heard anything yet. It seems like they still haven't heard anything yet. I mentioned Phil Dracovic, the Pine Richland kid who went to Notre Dame. He's now at Boston College. They found out on Tuesday. They announced on Tuesday that the NCAA had ruled him eligible to play this season. If he's eligible, I don't know why Joey Yellen wouldn't be eligible. I don't think Pitt should need Joey Yellen this year. I don't think there's a lot of downside to him being eligible. The only potential downside you run into is if something happens to Kenny Pickett, you need to play another quarterback and you end up choosing Joey Yellen, that you potentially run the risk of, maybe you lose 1 or 2 other quarterbacks to transfer after this season if they feel like they're behind him. Your best option is probably to go into the season with Kenny Pickett as your starter and Nick Patty as the backup, with the understanding for the 2 younger guys, Davis Bevell and Joey Yellen, with those guys understanding that next year it's wide open. You know what I mean? Nick Patty's older. He's more experienced. He's been on the field. He won a game. He'll be the backup, but next year it'll be wide open and everybody can, everybody can compete. And then ideally you keep everybody on the roster. Whereas if you go with Bevel as the backup or Yellen as the backup, you might run the risk of losing Patty down the road or maybe even the other one of the redshirt freshmen. So, I don't know. It's a tricky situation. I don't know why the NCAA wouldn't rule Joey Yellen eligible when they rule everybody else eligible. I also can't predict the NCAA. I gave up doing that a long time ago, like when they ruled Taysir Mack eligible. But I don't think there's a lot of downside to him being eligible and having him available to play this year. All right, we got to cut off. Our hour is up. I appreciate everybody who tuned in here on the live stream and everybody who listened to the podcast on Wednesday. Of course, you know the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Panther-Lair.com. We have a lot of fun in this live stream on Tuesday nights at 8:30 on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Pantherlaircom, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Come check it out. On Tuesday nights, it's great because, as you heard, we have interaction. We talk to each other. Guys are in the comments, asking questions, posting reactions, and we can kind of talk. We can go back and forth instead of just listening to the podcast. You can interact with the podcast, and I enjoy that quite a bit. So you can check that out on Tuesday nights. The audio podcast gets released on Wednesday, and then on Fridays we have our conversation podcast where we have a guest, talk a little Pitt sports or something related to Pitt with a guest. Every Friday. We'll get back on that one again this week. Hopefully we have some plans in the works for a Friday conversation podcast. And then Saturday morning, we have the Panthers Insider Show on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan. That's 8 a.m. We talk a little Pitt sports for an hour on 93.7 The Fan. So lots of places to get your Pitt fix, podcasts, radio show, and, of course, the website, Panther-Lair.com. While you're here on YouTube, like our page, like our channel. Don't just like the video, like the channel and subscribe to the channel. You got it. Royce Beacom says, don't forget the thumbs up. Like the video, that's cool, but subscribe to the Panther-Lair.com YouTube channel. That's the important one. Like them both. Like the video, like the stream, and like the page. Subscribe to the page. So we know how many people are on board for this. And then you also can get an alert when we go live for something like Elliot Donald committed. So we did a recruit reaction, a live reaction podcast, and everybody tuned in for that. You can get a little notification that says, hey, Panther-Lair.com is going live right now. Come talk a little Pitt sports. So subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. Subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on Panther-Lair.com. And we will see you on the message boards. Have a great rest of the week. We will talk to you next Tuesday night at 8:30. Thanks, everybody.